All right. Today I'm going to be talking about fun stealers in Path of Exile, and I think we can all agree that Path of Exile is a 10 out of 10 game. That does not mean it's a perfect game, but out of all the action role-playing games that exist, Path of Exile sits on top as the king. But the king can always use improvement, so he can stay the king. And here are 10 fun stealers that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to go quickly and do a high-level introduction, and then I'm going to go a little bit deeper into each one that requires a little bit deeper. So for the people that want a short video, reflect damage, corrupted blood, damage over time, cluster jewels, spell suppression, build disabling mods, on death effects, health-based damage, the campaign, and reading. These are the things that steal fun from the game from me. When I'm playing the game and any of these things kind of happens, fun is being stripped out of the game. And I think they can get rid of all of these things in some way, shape, or form and drastically improve the fun of this game. Starting with probably the least controversial and the easiest one to get rid of, reflect damage. I mean, I'm sure we've all been here, right? You forget, that goes back into the reading. You forget to read the mods on a map, you pop in a map, has reflect damage, and you die. For me, this keeps me out of hardcore almost exclusively. If I play this game for like 4 hours, I get a little complacent, I stop reading the map mods as well, and I'll eventually die from reflect damage on my hardcore character. It's a given, it's gonna happen, and there's nothing you can really do about it. It's not a fun or engaging league mechanic or game mechanic. I think it's just adopted from the Diablo 2 days. Diablo 2 was the most popular action role-playing game, so when Path of Exile was built, it felt it had to copy and replicate a lot of the functions and features inside of Diablo 2. And one of those is reflect damage. But I think everyone would agree that the game loses nothing by removing reflect damage completely. So that is fun stealer number 1. Fun stealer number 2, corrupted blood. Now the reason corrupted blood is a problem is because you can't really avoid it. You get corrupted blood on you when you hit an enemy, and I think we've all been there. When we're playing the game, we hit enemies, it automatically applies corrupting blood to us, and then we die. So this is just an annoyance. You have to get immunity to corrupted blood. You just kind of have to do it. And you have to do it in several different ways, and it's just not an engaging game mechanic because you can't really play around it. It just happens. Like, imagine if there was a timer that says every 10 seconds you just die unless you hit spacebar. That wouldn't be fun to hit spacebar every 10 seconds, but at least in that regard, you can play around it. You know you need to hit spacebar every 10 seconds. There's nothing you can do to avoid corrupted blood aside from getting immunity to corrupted blood or using the Pantheon. And this is just a bad mechanic across the board, and there would be no downside to just completely removing it, aside from the fact that no one is going to accidentally die because they don't have corrupted blood immunity. So corrupted blood, fun stealer number 2, get out of the game, ain't nobody gonna miss ya. The next one, damage over time. Now, I don't mean bleed and ignite. I mean damage over time pools on the ground, because Path of Exile is a game known for its amazing visual clarity. So whenever there's a damage over time pool on the ground, you're definitely going to be able to see it. And because you have that, I'm just joking, you can't see shit in this game. Because you can't see shit in this game, I don't think they should change the visual clarity, because sometimes it's pretty fun to build a build that just blows up the whole screen and you can't see anything. But what they could do is remove those annoying damage over time pools that are basically everywhere. Almost every boss has it, almost every map has it, just damage over time pools everywhere. And it's a problem. It steals my fun whenever I'm playing a game and I'm standing on damage over time and I die because I couldn't see that I was standing on damage over time. Another problem with damage over time pools is it adversely affects melee builds, because a lot of melee builds have to hold still in order to attack. And if you're holding still and you happen to hold still on a damage over time pool, you're then going to die. Perfect example is the red boss, Searching Exarch, I think is his name. You're fighting this guy, and he drops those tiny little red circles on the ground, and they do massive fire damage over time. And if you're not paying close enough attention, or you got a lot of screen clutter, and you stop in one of those to try to attack the boss, you're just going to die. And it's super annoying, and it's a fun stealer. Every time you die from a damage over time pool on the ground, you don't feel like it's an honest death. You don't feel like you deserved that death. At least I don't, and it steals my fun. So damage over time pools on the ground have got to go. Maybe in like very limited situations they're okay. Like maybe on the Maven boss they're okay, but even on the Maven boss they're still pretty annoying. But kind of for the Maven boss, it's kind of the point of the boss is try to balance your combat around those damage over time pools, and you can kind of control where the damage over time pools go. So maybe some damage over time pools are acceptable, but at the current level, I think damage over time pools are too much. There's too many of them. They're too prevalent in the game. They need to reduce those quite a bit. And by reducing damage over time pools, it's going to help out the builds that actually are struggling the most in this game, which are stationary builds. The builds that hold steel and do their damage. Not the auto casters or the minions or the totems. These builds that do crazy amount of damage and stay mobile, they don't really have that much of a problem with damage over time. But if you're trying to play a heavy strike build, or anything that is fixed and stationary or does massive screen clutter, you're going to have problems with damage over time. And there's not too many damage over time mitigation methods. And the fact that damage over time has a completely separate mitigation area than regular damage is also kind of, it's just kind of not very fun. So damage over time, it needs to go. Or at minimum, it needs to be reduced significantly. Now on to cluster jewels. Don't get me wrong, I love me some cluster jewels. However, cluster jewels have kind of stolen the passive tree. I very much love GGG's design for their passive tree. The passive tree in Path of Exile is excellent, but if we look at this heat map, I have every character selected, I sorted by DPS. The cluster jewels are very overrepresented. So if we just grab a character, cluster jewel, cluster jewel, cluster jewel, and that's true for pretty much every character. It's super true for the Ascendant. The Ascendant, basically, if you're playing in Scion, you're just going to be grabbing cluster jewels. That's it. You're ignoring the entire tree, running to cluster jewels, and then getting cluster jewels. We can also remove that and go down to these skills here, and you'll see once you get past the Ascendant skills, it then is just cluster jewel skills across the board. So almost everyone is using cluster jewels. I think Deadeye is actually one of the ones that's using the least amount of cluster jewels because they only grab the 2. Some people only grab the 1, and that's because the Deadeye gets a lot of additional projectiles and stuff like that. But every other build is just maximizing these cluster jewels like crazy. Cluster jewel, cluster jewel, cluster jewel. And it's a bit of a problem, not because cluster jewels are bad. Cluster jewels are very fun. When they introduced cluster jewels, it was game-changing. It's huge. Cluster jewels are huge. However, I think they should limit it to 1. Maybe limit it to 2, but I think limiting cluster jewels to 1 is going to allow people to explore this massive skill tree again on high-end builds. High-end builds will no longer just be 3 cluster jewels. You'll be able to explore the passive tree a little bit better. And I think the passive tree, the way it's designed, is one of the best aspects of Path of Exile, and the cluster jewels take away from some of the best aspects of Path of Exile. Sure, you don't have to use cluster jewels, but if everyone else is using cluster jewels and they're getting so much more power than you, it kind of forces you to use cluster jewels just a little bit, in theory, in like psychology, the psychology of using it. If everyone else has more power because they're using cluster jewels, the odds of you not using cluster jewels are pretty low. So if they limit it to just 1, that'll be pretty excellent. And I don't think it's going to kill that many builds if you limit it to 1 large cluster jewel. Some of the strength stuff, because a lot of builds require strength, and there's not a lot of strength on the passive tree, but physical damage, sorry. There's not a lot of physical damage on the cluster tree, so a lot of the physical damage cluster jewels enable specific builds, especially the exsanguinate builds that are spellcasters. The cluster jewels provide so much damage because of those physical cluster jewels, and there's also a bunch of physical damage that gets converted to other elements, so the physical cluster jewels are really strong. But I don't think those builds will be completely dead if you get rid of the cluster jewels. Now, aura stacking, probably completely dead if you get rid of cluster jewels, but they can fix that in other ways. But I think cluster jewels, it's time to scale back the cluster jewels and limit it to just 1, and it's just going to feel better, I think, as a game, building the skill trees, building your character. It's going to feel better if you only have 1 cluster jewel. And it's also going to put a lot of pressure on which cluster jewels you want. And I think it's gonna be better. It'll probably reduce the price of cluster jewels too, because if you only need one, it's gonna be a lot more inexpensive. That's just my take. This is probably one of the more contentious ones because cluster jewels are awesome. Don't get me wrong, I love cluster jewels, but they're just too much. I mean, you can axe out 80% of this entire skill tree here that nobody grabs, nobody uses, because everybody's focused on the cluster jewels. And I don't really like that. I don't really like it. Spell suppression. Spell suppression has become a mechanic that is mostly mandatory, and I don't like it when they add a defensive layer that becomes ultra mandatory. The good thing about like Determination and Grace is you can run Grace and not Determination, or Determination and not Grace. But if you don't have massive elemental resistances, you have to have spell suppression. You will not do good in this game unless you max out your spell suppression. And it's not even that you need a little bit of spell suppression. You need to get to that 100% spell suppression or get lucky spell suppression. And even lucky spell suppression is a little iffy at times. But I think spell suppression is a fun stealer because it forces you to get it. Now, the only way you can get around getting spell suppression is if you go massively high into your maximum elemental resistances, and even then, it doesn't feel as good as spell suppression. Once you get 100% spell suppression, it really, really boosts your defenses way too high. So what they should do instead of spell suppression is, 1, reduce the amount of elemental damage the enemies are doing in the game. They're already doing some pretty bonkers spell damage in the elemental department or physical department. Alright, the next one is build disabling mods. And I'm going to let Dreamcore, one of the best Path of Exile YouTubers in history, explain why this is a problem.
Players combined, this character is nearly immortal. Well, nearly. The character was a hardcore trade character, and it did die in the Delve Mines around depth 1200. It died to pretty much one of the only weaknesses of the build, that being the rare monster modifier which causes flasks to lose charges. Of course, this build is completely built around flasks. You can see here when the flasks are turned off, the character has barely any effective health at all.
There you go. That is what I'm talking about. It is a fun stealer. Now, in this game, there should be no enemy mods that completely turn an entire ascendancy off. There are multiple ascendancies in this game that can get turned off by mods, the most prevalent being the flask mods, but there's also an armor stripper mod that if you're doing an armor stacker build and you go to this mod, your armor is basically disabled. They have one, I think, that like messes with auras. There's a bunch of these mods that if the enemy gets this mod, and the mod isn't on the map, it's an enemy mod. If an enemy gets this mob, it's a guaranteed death. And the flask one is probably the worst, because that mob, instead of saying flasks lose charges, it should just say, this mob will kill all Pathfinders. Pathfinders die. Now imagine if there was a mod on an enemy that said, Pathfinders die. Would you like that mod? Is that mod fun? When you're playing the game and then you run across the mod that says your character dies, that's not a good mod. I don't like it. And the only way to catch these mods is to read the individual mods of each enemy. That's not fun. So any mods that totally destroy an entire character class or an ascendancy or a build type, those should just all be removed. It's not going to hurt the game to remove these mods. It's only going to make the game more fun. So instead of flash charges lose charges, it could be something along the lines of flask have 20% less effectiveness. Pathfinder is still going to be able to survive under that condition. It's just going to be it's going to take a little bit more damage. It's going to be a little bit more rough. But even that I don't really like, because Pathfinders exist and they use flasks for all of their defenses pretty much most of the time, and it's just a little too heavy-handed for specific build type, and that kills builds. Like, a lot of builds will just die because it doesn't work well with the mob types. And it's kind of similar to Reflect Damage and Corrupting Blood in the sense that it's an uncontrollable death that doesn't make you feel good when you die. The best death that feels the best is a giant slam that was telegraphed that you just didn't dodge. You get hit with the giant slam that by all means you had the ability to avoid that death. That's a good death. That death feels great. That's why Dark Souls feels so good when you play Dark Souls, is a lot of the deaths you can see where you could have avoided that death. Now a mob with disable your flask or disable your armor, the only way you can avoid that death is log out or run away. And if you're in like the delves like Ben was, you're just gonna die. Now, after saying that, if you're not subscribed to Dreamcore or you don't know who Dreamcore is, I think he's new. His videos are excellent, way better than mine. So if you're watching mine, just unsubscribe to this, turn off this video, and then go watch some Dreamcore because it's much better. On death effects. This isn't the video I wanted to find, but I couldn't find the one. And it's both from Quinn. Quinn has a lot of really good examples of on death effects that are just cheesy and fun stealers. See, you see that? He kills the boss. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 whole seconds later, he dies after the boss is dead. Now, he has another one that's far more egregious. It's like, I think, a corpse explode situation, and it's like 8 seconds away from when he actually killed the enemy, and he just walks away, and something explodes and kills him that he couldn't see. I think he had his loot covering the actual explosion thing, and it just killed him. On death effects are complete trash. They're not fun at all. Now, there's an exception. Well, actually, it's not an on death effects. The little balls that chase you and then drop on you, those are totally fine because you can see those super easily. So if they really wanted to keep on death effects, they can do a lot of different things to make them better. And one would be not have them be an on death effects where the enemies are, have them be like a meteor type on death effect where you can either see a shadow going bigger so you can tell it's coming, just a way to visually see that shit's about to go down. And they don't have that right now. So they have to address on death effect at some point if they want to keep the fun factor going at maximum levels. And I feel that on death effects, all they are is like a cheesy way to kill players, and it's never fun when you die from an on death effect, ever. Health-based damage. Then this one is just going to be real quick. I don't have any examples of it, but Detonate Dead. Detonate Dead is kind of trash. It's always overpowered because it's doing health-based damage, and the explosions are health-based damage. That one's not that big of a deal because, you know, Chieftain pops are excellent. But Detonate Dead has always kind of been a problem. They've been league events, and I think Ziz even removes Detonate Dead from some of his events, and that's just because health-based damage doesn't scale very well and allows you to do way too much damage for minimum investment. So I just think they need to remove all health-based damages. Anything that does 3% of enemies' health as damage or something like that, just remove it from the game. This one's not so much a fun stealer as much as it is a balance stealer. There's nothing worse than being, like, let's say you want to race and you're forced to play Detonate Dead because that's the only thing that's going to win a race. And Detonate Dead is just not that fun to play. At least to me, I hate playing Detonate Dead. So if there's ever a race that everybody knows Detonate Dead is going to win that race, I can't or won't participate because it's just not fun to be forced to play a health-based damage build. That's it. It's not that big of a deal. This one's not that big of a fun stealer, but I wanted an even 10, so I threw that on there. The campaign. They need to have you only have to run the campaign once per season. So if we look at my Ancestor campaign, I have 4 characters here. I deleted one. I leveled up 5 characters all the way to maps, and each one of those takes me at least 6 hours. The average is probably 7 because the average is probably 6. The first character usually takes me 7 hours, and then every character after that takes me between 5 and 6. And that is just a lot of wasted time. I don't enjoy running the campaign more than once. I kind of like running the campaign the first time because you're able to kind of like improve your speed. Not that I do that. I just mostly just follow my brother around and he goes fast, and I follow him around to slow him down, so I ruin his experience. But after you complete the campaign once, they should just allow you to skip it and either allow you to run maps at low level and cater the maps at low level, or just let you start a character at 70. Why not just let you start a character at 70? Start a character at 70, already has all of the labs. Once you get a character, oh, even better. Check it. Once you kill Maven, or any boss that they choose, you can then skip the campaign. So that way you can't just get to maps and then create infinite characters. You have to kill one of the major bosses, a pinnacle boss, or even an Uber boss. And let you kill one Uber boss. This would be a perfect reason to have you kill Uber Elder, is to have you be able to skip the campaign. So you can start your starter build, get strong enough to kill one of the Uber bosses, and then after you kill that Uber boss, you unlock Campaign Skip. Campaign Skip is a beautiful thing in Diablo 3 and Diablo 4, and Path of Exile needs it. The reason I always end my leagues playing this game is I want it to play like a duelist. I don't want to spend the 6 hours to level up a duelist. I just don't. It's 6 hours of unfun. So Campaign Skip, definitely on the list for things that Path of Exile needs to just add. Add a campaign skip. Get rid of running the campaign more than once per season. I can't even tell you how many times I've ran this stupid campaign and I am over it. I am over the campaign completely. I'm tired of it. I'm burnt out on the campaign, and I don't want to make more videos. I don't want to play this game anymore if I know I'm gonna have to run through that stupid campaign again. I tried to do the latest, I tried to do Blast from the Past, and I was running through the campaign, and I was like, I just don't want to do this, so I just stopped playing. I'd rather watch paint dry than run a campaign for the 5th time in a season, only to know that next season I'm gonna have to run this campaign another 4 to 5 times. It kills me. It kills me. I hate it. Remove the campaign after you complete it once, or put some type of criteria. Hell, let me pay $5 for a new character that doesn't have to run the campaign. I don't care. Get rid of the campaign after you've completed it one time. Maximize fun. Now for the final one, and that is reading. I don't really like reading. When I'm running maps, I don't want to have to stop the map and read something. And Path of Exile has added a lot of different mechanics that require you to read. You got the altars, which you have to read because some of those might be bad. And then you have this one. Now, Path of Exile GGG has done something extremely awesome, which is adding colors. They added a yellow color to immunities, and this is brilliant. This is what they need to do for a lot of different aspects to allow you to be able to visually see the stuff you don't want or the stuff you do want without needing to read the specific mechanic. Now, a lot of you might be rolling your eyes, just read the game, but I like to watch TV while I play this game. I like to just kind of turn my brain off, run some maps, and not have to read anything. I don't want to be, so focused on the game at all times I have to read every single mechanic before I die. So what they could do to alleviate this is obviously what they've already done with this coloring, but they shouldn't have any mods that make enemies immune to chaos damage or immune to any damage, really. So that should just be gone. And they know it should be gone. They're just stubborn and refusing not to remove it. And I know they know it should be gone because the only thing out of all of these that it gets a different color is the immunity ones. Now, what they could do is add colorization into your loot filter, so you can change the color of specific mods you want to have an issue with, or for specific league mechanics, they can add some type of filtration. So let's say monsters do not grant flash charges when slain is something that you really don't want to have. So you can go into some type of filtration system and you can either change this to a color, and it'll allow you to change it to a color. So let's say I can click on this detonator, or have a little button here on this toggle explosives that'll list all of the mods for this league mechanic, and you can either click the mods that you want to either ignore or highlight, or some type of way that gives you a color visualization versus a reading visualization. Let's say you're a physical build and you want anything that mitigates physical damage to be highlighted red, or just toned down or something, some type of visual indicator of things that you would otherwise have to read. Now, I think that would be a great improvement in terms of fun factor and playability. It's definitely a minor gripe, but all of these are kind of minor gripes because this is a 10 out of 10 game. I'm just looking for ways to improve the 10 out of 10 experience and make the game a little bit more fun.